This is a reading from the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society Bulletin, number 125, October 1971. The journal article is written by Ernest W. Williams, Jr. It's called Looking Back 50 Years of American Railroading. The excerpts will cover about half of the article. Technological advance accelerated. Drag freight service continued to be the hallmark of rail operations in the early 20s. The Mikado was widespread. Malays were numerous in areas of difficult profile, and the most numerous class built in the early 20s was Pennsylvania I-1S 210. Average freight train speed was only 11.8 miles per hour in 1925. Freight power was characteristically underboilered, but in that year, Lima's A1 was outshopped and the era of superpower was launched. In general, motive power has always led the way in railroad technical development, other advances following in train. The A1 had ample firebox and boiler capacity, but that was linked with 63-inch wheels and a limited 60% cutoff. The factor of adhesion was a low 3.60, resulting in a slippery locomotive. The earliest employment on the B&A through the Berkshires was not conducive to fast running. Beginning in 1927, Erie acquired 105 of the 284 wheel arrangement, which cured the deficiencies of the A1 and resulted in a superb fast freight engine. The S engine had 70-inch wheels, a 3.98 factor of adhesion, ample boiler horsepower, and in the Alco version, substantially full stroke. From that design came C&O's great T10 210-4 of 1930, capable of moving 12,500-ton coal trains with dispatch from Russell, Kentucky to Walbridge, Ohio. The further development of the 482, as in PRR's M1, NYC's L2, and UP's 7000 provided for the first time since the 440 a considerable stock of versatile dual-purpose locomotives. And in 1927, the Hudson commenced to be built in large numbers for the New York Central's passenger service, with 79-inch wheels, ample steaming capacity, and good adhesion. The first of those locomotives participated in B&O's Centennial, the Fair of the Iron Horse, in 1927. Where heavier power was of the essence, the 484 was a logical development, one of the more outstanding of the period being Great Northern's S2, first locomotive of this wheel arrangement to be built, with 80-inch drivers for fast passenger service. Most outstanding was UP's 9000 class, first outshopped in 1926, and the only U.S.-built class of the 412-2 wheel arrangement. Built in quantity, the 9s saw service over most UP main lines, although since their long wheelbase tended to straighten out the curves in the Blue Mountains, their tenure on the OWR&N was brief. Numerous single expansion articulateds were built new in the 20s, generally of 2880 and 2882 types, and with small driving wheel diameter. Northern Pacific 5000, a 2884 built in 1930, was a harbinger of things to come, however, and was not to be exceeded either in total tractive effort or weight. Experiments with long locomotive runs also began in the late 20s, with the promise of substantially increased average daily mileage for important classes of modern power. Mechanical stokers and power reverse gears became prevalent on large power, and conversion to oil fuel, especially in the Southwest, moved forward rapidly. The late 20s and early 30s were marked by the introduction of important refinements in locomotive design. The cast steel locomotive bed began to be used as a means of simplifying construction, eliminating broken frames and reducing maintenance costs. Forced feed lubrication became widespread on larger power. Roller bearings commenced to be applied, first on leading and trailing axles, later in driving boxes and rod bearings. The dark year of 1930 was brightened by the appearance of the Timken all-roller bearing 484, which later found a home on Northern Pacific. Tenders were greatly enlarged both in fuel and water capacity, and stops for coal and water thereby reduced. The diesel locomotive, which made its debut in switching service on CNJ and B&O in 1925 and 1926, was as yet but a speck on the horizon. Boiler water treatment made large strides. Mechanical coaling stations spread rapidly. Signaling improvements were widespread. Color light and position light signals began to replace semaphores. Four-aspect signaling enabled train movements to be expedited. Cab signals enabled full-speed running in conditions of poor visibility, and in 1926, the first centralized traffic control installation went into service on the Big Four. Important freight yard construction was undertaken, and the car retarder made its appearance at Gibson, and was later installed in many another yard. Proviso Yard on the Northwestern at Chicago reached full development in 1931, including 52-stall roundhouse and the largest 1C1 transfer house in the world, the latter shortly to become a white elephant. Bridge loadings were increased to take heavier power. Tunnels enlarged or daylighted to permit wider clearances. Sidings were extended and multiplied. Rail sections increased steadily in weight, reaching a maximum in the 152-pound and 156-pound sections installed in some heavy traffic lines of the Pennsylvania. The Sperry detector car came into use to ferret out internal fissures, and the process of controlled cooling for rail, designed to avoid change in the molecular structure which generated fissures, promised relief from a problem of growing severity given increasing axle loads and train speeds. In the freight service, the container made its appearance. Pennsylvania developed a system-wide container system for less than carload, LCL, working through a crane transfer facility at Enola. Lehigh Valley and New York Central employed containers extensively for both LCL and for brick and other bulk commodities. Container use in dolomite and other bulk service spread with some rapidity. The unwillingness of the ICC to permit freight all kinds rates and a level of rates regarded as truck competitive nipped further container developments for general freight in the bud. The first piggyback service was, however, offered in 1926 by Chicago North Shore and Milwaukee, and some other roads in the Middle West adopted the plan soon after. The proportion of all-steel cars in both the freight and passenger car fleets increased rapidly. Freight car capacities moved upwards, and new types of car made their appearance. Noteworthy were the 65-foot mill-type gondola car and the covered hopper car, both of which were first built in the late 20s. In 1932, the AB brake had sustained tests which indicated its great superiority in the control of long freight trains. Principal passenger trains were, of course, re-equipped with all-steel cars having superior internal appointments, and a number of new name trains were inaugurated. No great speed-up of passenger service occurred, however. With the airplane not yet a fully established carrier of passengers, 7 sections of the Chief were not unknown to depart Los Angeles behind 3700 class mountains, nor was the Century to be outdone in number of sections by any train anywhere. Passenger power had fully attained the capability to handle long and heavy all-steel consists on accepted schedules. The gas-electric car became a standard money saver in branch line service. There had been a spate of electrification early in the century when the lines into Grand Central and Pennsylvania stations in New York and the Pennsylvania's suburban lines out of Philadelphia were electrified. Norfolk and Western's Elkhorn grade likewise was brought under wire together with the original Cascade Tunnel of Great Northern and Milwaukee's line through the Rockies, Bitterroots, and Cascades. The 20s saw further progress in electrification when, in April 1925, the first locomotives were delivered for Virginian's electrification from Mullins to Roanoke. In 1926 and later, the Illinois Central suburban service at Chicago, Redding's at Philadelphia, and most of Lackawanna's out of Hoboken were electrified. Completion of the present Cascade Tunnel in 1929 was accompanied by electrification of the Great Northern from Skykomish to Wenatchee. The extensive Pennsylvania electrification, involving the greatest density of a mixed passenger and freight traffic in North America, was authorized in 1928 and completed between New York and Wilmington, Delaware, early in 1933. It was later extended to Washington on the one hand and Harrisburg on the other, including the low-grade freight lines between Trenton, Parksburg, and Enola, and was accompanied by new passenger stations at 30th Street, Philadelphia, the suburban station adjacent to Broad Street, and Newark. After completion of the Pennsylvania program, no further electrification was undertaken.